Hello, my more brothers. Back again. And this is something that's been coming up for the last, I would say, couple of years, really since the pandemic. I did a video talking about going monk mode going viral and a lot of guys going in and out of what we call monk mode. And what guys are realizing, and even in this article, it kind of touches on it, is that they don't need the relationships like they used to. So I've seen a lot of these blogs and articles talk about single men, or the rise of single men, and men not having sex, and men going incel, and all this nonsense. Me and the lamest protagonists over the past 5 years have been talking about the rise of what we call mouse utopia, where all this pushing together of a bunch of people into this urban environment where it's relatively safe and most of your needs are met. You have the separation of male and female. You see it most acute in Japan, where most guys have kind of bowed out and become what they call grass eaters. They've drawn into themselves and they found a way to actually satisfy most of their needs without female interaction. And so this kind of urbanism is starting to spread. But let me go ahead and read this and I'll come back on the other side and we'll talk about it. Most young men are single, most young women are not. Now, how they classify single, it never really says. More than 60% of young men are single, nearly twice the rate of unattached young women, signaling a larger breakdown of social, romantic, and sexual life of the American male. Men in their 20s are more likely than women in their 20s to be romantically uninvolved, sexually dormant, friendless, and lonely. Ooh, that sounds tragic, doesn't it? They stand at the vanguard of an epidemic of declining marriage, sexuality, and relationships that afflict all of young America. See, declining marriage is the biggest point that the state or the United States or society is worried about. Same thing's going on in, I think, is Denmark. Denmark or the Netherlands. The same thing's going on where they have to almost bribe men to have sex with women because the society's gotten so bad. We're in a crisis of connection, said Niobe Way, a psychology professor and founder of the Project for the Advancement of Our Common Humanity at New York University. Disconnection from ourselves and disconnection from each other, and it's getting worse. That's the mouse utopia in action. In the worst case scenario, the young American man's social disconnect can have tragic consequences. Here's the fear mongering. Young men commit suicide at 4 times the rate of young women. They always have. So this is not anything new. Younger men are largely responsible for the rising rates of mass shootings, a trend some researchers link to their growing social isolation. That's nothing new either. Okay. In fact, the mass shootings are not as bad as they were in the 90s. Societal changes that began in the Eisenhower years have eroded the patriarchy that once ruled the American home, classroom, and workplace. Women now collect nearly 60% of the bachelor's degrees. Men still earn more. Among the youngest adults, the income gap has narrowed to $43 a week, especially the youngest one, because guess what? Men don't reach their economic peak to what? 35. So if you look at young men and women below 30, then yeah, women are a hell of a lot closer in wages. But the thing is, they're cherry picking, the cherry picking stats. Scholars say that the new era of gender parity has reshaped relationship dynamics, empowering young women and in many cases removing young men from the equation. In other words, young men aren't keeping up. Women don't need to be in long-term relationships. They don't need to be married. They'd rather go to brunch with friends than have a horrible date, said Greg Matos, a couple and family psychologist in Los Angeles who recently penned a viral article, What's Behind the Rise of Lonely Single Men. Recent years have seen a historic rise in unpartnered Americans, particularly the young. The pandemic made things worse, as I said. As of 2022, Pew Research Center found 30% of adults are neither married, living with a partner, nor engaged in a committed relationship. Nearly half of all young adults single, 34% of women, and a whopping 63% of men. How do they define single? Is it living with a partner? Now, there's more women than men. So, how are there more women partnered than men? Doesn't make sense. Especially at that rate. That's how come these stats don't make sense. Only half of single men are actively. Oh, here's the rub, right? Here's where the Mouse Utopia thing comes in. This is one place where I do agree. Only half of single men are actively seeking relationships or even casual dates, according to Pew. That figure is declining. Men are not bowing out. You have to think that the pandemic had an impact on some of those numbers. I agree with that, says psychologist Fred Rabinowitz, a psychologist and professor at the University of Redlands. Why are they all in California? Who studies masculinity. Young men are watching a lot of social media, they're watching a lot of porn, and I think they're getting a lot of their needs met without having to go out. And I think that's starting to be a habit. That's a problem with society. That's also a problem with women. Even seasoned researchers struggle to fully account for the relationship gap between young men and women. If single young men outnumber single young women nearly 2-1, then who are the young women dating? Exactly. It's impossible. Some of them are dating each other. 1/5 of Generation Z identifies as queer, and research suggests bisexual women make up a large share of the young adult queer community. Oh, okay, they're becoming Amazons. And is America turning into the Isle of Lesbos? Young women are also dating and marrying slightly older men. Now that doesn't make sense. Carrying on a tradition that stretches back more than a century, the average age at first marriage is around 30 for men and 28 for women, according to census figures. Heterosexual women are getting more choosy. Women don't want to marry down to form long-term relationships to a man with less education and earnings than herself, said Ronald Levant, professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Akron and author of several books on masculinity. In previous generations, young women entered adulthood in a society that expected them to find a financially stable man that would support them through decades of marriage and motherhood. Over the 1950s and 60s, the pattern gradually broke down, and today it's all but gone. But that's what you wanted. You can't have both. You can't have equity and equality in wages and still have men support you, have men that make more than you. That doesn't work out. Women are tiring of their stereotypical role as full-time therapists for emotionally distant men. They want a partner who is emotionally open and empathetic, the opposite of the age-old masculine ideal. So why they are marrying older men with more resources and expecting the man to be provided and make more. Today in America, women expect more from men, Levant said, and unfortunately, so many men don't have more to give. That's true. The same emotional deficits that hurt men in the dating pool also hamper them in forming meaningful relationships. That's bullshit. 15% of men report having no close friendships. 15%. A five-fold increase from 1990. So in 1990, it was 3%. According to a research by the Survey Center on American Life, men are less naturally relational than women, said Richard Reeves, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, whose new book of Boys and Men has drawn wide praise. Reeves points to a recent Saturday Night Live sketch that reimagined the neighborhood dog park as a man park, poking fun at this reliance of men on women to do the emotional lifting for them. Social circles have been shrinking for men and women, especially since the pandemic, but men struggle more. 30 years ago, 55% of men reported having 6 or more close friends. By 2021, that share had slipped to 27%. That's got to remember, 30 years ago, the internet was in its infancy. Now it's not. Anyhow, this is something that is bothering the society, and it's bothering women because most of these articles that I see come from either psychologists at the top or women. Women have a real hard time with this because they're not getting dates. They're not getting male attention, and they're having to link up with each other. Lesbian relationships, for the most part, do not work very well. It's only a small percentage, especially when women get to be in their 30s. It doesn't work very well. And do women have the same kind of requirements for women that they have for men? And they don't. This is pretty much the end goal of feminism and how you train these women. And that's like these structures that we build in society are breaking down. And what they're afraid of is that the fertility rate is already bad. It's already like 1.5, okay, 1.7, 1.5. It's going to crash even further. And most of the guys, and I saw this in another video. In fact, I might, if I can find it, I'll react to what the Better Bachelor said, the Joker said. White women especially, have become just as insufferable as black women. The difference is that white men are not used to their women becoming insufferable. And what white men are doing, they're saying, I'm out. They're not even playing around. It didn't take them 100 years to figure out that we're out. See, black men are a little bit slower to the draw because we're used to the harshness and the contempt and the criticism by our women because we're raised that way by our mothers. But white men are not raised that way, and they're not taking this shit. And white men said, yeah, I'd rather get some porn, social media, get some lube, and basically hit up my friends on social media, on YouTube, on Twitter, on the gaming channels. A lot of guys, that's where they are. The thing is, you say the close friends, that means friends that you meet up on on a lunch or something like that. A lot of guys have their friends all over the world. So they're substituting their connections in real life for connections online. I've talked to a lot of fathers whose sons that are millennials or Z's and millennials and stuff like that. And a lot of these guys, their life is online. Their life is virtual. Their friendships are virtual. You got to remember, the structure of society is built on a family. What happens when men and women can't make families? Lesbians don't make families. They don't. And if the men don't come together and actually participate in this matriarchy, this gynocracy that's forming in the United States. I called it a white gynocracy. This is proof of a white gynocracy. This is point blank proof of a white gynocracy. The Leviathan, the state, has become female. All the laws, all the rules, everything is slanted toward female, and the men are saying that it's unfair. And once the men start saying it's unfair, guess what they're going to do? They're going to bow out. They don't have to leave. They don't have to protest. They don't have to fight. They don't have to kill anybody. Just not participate. They're worried about violence and suicide and stuff like that. That's not a society killer. Society killer is when the people in the state, the people in the society no longer believe. That's what happened to Greece. Greece got taken over by Rome. Why? Because it got so unfair inside Greece that the people themselves decided not to participate anymore. Greece decayed. Rome decayed. The Soviet Union fell apart because it decayed. People no longer believed in the Soviet Union as it was. So guess what happened? It fell apart. Any large society, any advanced society will fall apart if the men no longer believe in its precepts. The Holy Roman Empire in Europe, that was held together for 800 years, fell apart with a social contract because the men no longer believed in the precepts that they had believed in before. They didn't believe in it. Napoleon ran all the way across Europe, broke the back of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church holds on Europe. And Europe had to adopt a different model. This feminism model that has been pushed on the men in the United States for 50 years does not work. Matriarchy does not work without the consent of its men. Same thing with a patriarchy, does not work without the consent of its women. You cannot force men into an unfair deal for very long. We think 50 years is a long time. It's not. These structures are supposed to last thousands of years, not decades. The second wave feminism actually accelerated. But this thing has been eroding since the 18th century. 18th century, the typical fertility rate of a woman was 8 or 9, right? By the time this 20th century rolled around, okay, it was less than 3, down by 2/3. In the 20th century, the average fertility rate of a woman was 3. At the end of the 20th century, 21st century is 1.5, cut in half and dropping. And if it wasn't for the incentives that America puts out, if it wasn't for them importing immigrants to bolster those numbers, it'd be 1.2. Because if you look at the fertility rate, if you look at the population of what they call it the death cross, when there's less babies being born than people dying, more people dying than babies being born. It's called a death cross. The white population in the United States has reached a death cross. I think it was 2014, 2015. They've already reached it. Normally, when you reach a demographic death cross, it's almost irreversible. You see that going on in Korea. The thing is, some things are probably irreversible. The Mouse Utopia showed that things like this only accelerate. They accelerate to the point where it becomes irreversible. What they're trying to do right now with all these articles and saying how lonely men are and how bad their lives are, because I always say partnered men, because there used to be married men, now it's partnered men. They're not even trying to get you to be married anymore. They're trying to get you to partner now because things have gotten so bad. Like Austin Holloman said, it's that bad. When women have become so insufferable, men don't even want to partner with them. They don't even want sex anymore. They rather have some porn and some lotion. That's how insufferable they've become. And this is proof of it, because I can't tell you how many articles, because I have the Medium, right? The Medium is full of these things. Man, I might start reading these things. They're full of this about men being unpartnered, trying to shame men back into compliance, just like they try to shame black men into complying with what black women want. They're trying the same kind of sign language on white men. But white men are not socialized that way. They're not. You're trying to call them incels. You're trying to call them less masculine. You try to call them weak. You try to call them all this kind of stuff. It's not going to work on white men. It works on black men. And all they're doing with all men, because black men have finally had it, right, is accelerate this process. I've heard of young boys do not want to be bothered with young girls because of this, because they become insufferable. Marriage is supposed to be easy. Marriage is supposed to be a way to get out of poverty, not you have to make so much money to qualify for a chick. So if chicks want to group up and they want to date each other and they want to marry each other, that's fine. That is the trend, right? Men will adapt. They'll either do one or two things, either go into their caves and make this their routine and make it their lives and kind of bow out of society, or they get on a plane like Passport Bros and go someplace else. Either way, your society will die. That's what Richard Reeves and the Brookings Institute are really pressing upon. You cannot have this pendulum swing so far the other way to get out of balance. And once you're out of balance, a generation later, after you pushed all these women into college and pushed them to have degrees and put all the money into them, guess what? They're not happy. They're the ones that are complaining. They're the ones making all these demands and saying, if you don't, we're not going to give you any pussy. Guys said, fuck it, I don't need your pussy. Keep it. The price is too high. Like the MGTOW said, Barbarossa said, the juice is no longer worth the squeeze. And the guys are passing up all the lemon and limes and oranges in the grocery store. They said, price is too high. We're not buying them. We'll take some vitamin C pills and call it a day. That's the lotion in the porn. It's cheaper and less stress. Men will figure it out. They always have. The boys are figuring it out. It's called being online. The boys are meeting up in their own groups, and women hate it because they say that there are female hate groups. And the women had it good for a second, right? They could go online and pick the top guy. Now you got to share a whole bunch of guys. Now you see, 3 women share one black dude, but you got to figure it out. People think you can do polygyny without some kind of balance. People forget the balance is either prostitution or what they call a village wife. If you're going to have a whole bunch of women share one guy, then you have to, on the transverse, you got to have one woman share a whole bunch of guys. There's got to be a balance. You don't have a balance, then guess what? Your society will come apart. Most societies that do this kind of stuff, guess what? They don't thrive. There's a reason that monogamous societies do better. There's a reason for it. Because you have the participation of your men. You have to have a buy-in for your men. If you don't have a buy-in for your men, guess what is going to happen? Society is actually going to decline. That's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen here. Mouse Utopia is undefeated. It's happening all over the world. It's not just happening here. Everybody knows it. Everybody sees it. This is the climax. Can you remedy it? And so far, they're not doing a good job. So far, what they have been doing is trying to force men to comply. Guess what? As my friend used to say, that TV don't play no more. That record is all scratched. It's all done. Figure out something different. Anyhow, with that, I'm going to bounce off here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.